Felix never opened his door to anyone, until a shivering little girl whispered, "Sir, my mom didn't come home last night." One innocent plea drags him into a storm that will change all three lives forever. Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to Ms. Love Stories channel, the place where love, drama, and unforgettable moments come alive. I'm so thrilled you're here, ready to dive into stories that will make your heart race, bring tears, and leave you believing in the power of love. Before we begin, I want to get to know all of you. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from, because in the next video, I'll give a special shout out to some of you amazing viewers from around the world. I can't wait to see how far our love story family reaches. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell, so you never miss a single emotional journey. Get ready to feel, laugh, cry, and fall in love all over again, because every story we share here is for you. Now, the story begins. Rose. Felix Hawthorne liked the sound of silence. It was predictable, loyal, and unlike people, never disappointed him. He stood before the glass wall of his penthouse, looking out at the city wrapped in a thick curtain of snow. The world below moved slowly, headlights dimmed by white, streets muffled by winter's breath. His reflection stared back at him. Sharp suit, rigid posture, expression unreadable even to himself. The man everyone called the Iron CEO. He loosened his tie but didn't exhale. He never did. Behind him, the apartment was pristine, almost sterile. Not a blanket out of place, not a single photo frame on any surface. No softness. No warmth. No evidence that a man lived here. Only a CEO who worked here. He checked the time. 11:42 p.m. Another day spent fixing other people's crises, making decisions that shaped companies, families, futures, but never his own. He turned away from the window, heading toward the kitchen for his usual late-night chamomile tea. His assistant insisted it helped him sleep. Felix suspected she simply hoped he'd try sleeping for a change. But tonight the tea tasted like cold metal. A strange heaviness pressed against his ribs, the kind he ignored out of habit. Loneliness disguised as fatigue. Emptiness masked as routine. He set the cup down and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Outside, the snow kept falling. Meanwhile, across the city, Colette Alvarez rushed through the back exit of the diner, her breath forming shaky clouds in the icy air. She wrapped her thin coat tighter around her, tugging her backpack strap over her shoulder. It had been another double shift. Another day of wiped tables, forced smiles, aching feet. But at least she'd earned enough tips to buy her daughter's favorite cocoa for tomorrow morning. Small joys were lifelines. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the cracked screen. Overdue bills. Final notice. She sighed and tucked it away. The streets were dim, snow settling on the shoulders of her coat, her hair, her lashes. She had no time to watch it fall the way she used to when she was younger. Back then snow meant magic. Now it meant cold, danger, and longer walks home because buses were delayed. Still she pushed forward. Her daughter was waiting. Her daughter, her purpose, her heartbeat. But tonight, unbeknownst to her, something was already shifting in their world. Something that would drag her name into a stranger's life and change the direction of all three futures. Felix was about to turn off the kitchen lights when a sound echoed from the hallway outside his penthouse. A shuffle. A hesitant step. Then nothing. He frowned. His security team was precise. No one reached this floor without clearance. No one wandered this high-end hallway by accident. Another soft sound. A sniffle. Childlike. Felix's brows knitted together. He approached the door slowly, every instinct alert. When he pulled it open, the rush of cold air carried in a small gasp. A little girl, no older than 7 or 8, stood trembling in the snow-covered hallway, her coat soaked, her eyes wide and red from crying. Snowflakes melted on her eyelashes. Her tiny hands clutched the straps of a faded pink backpack. Felix froze. She didn't belong here. Not on the 47th floor. Not alone at midnight. Before he could speak, she whispered, voice breaking like thin ice. Sir, my mom didn't come home last night." The words drifted into the warm apartment and landed in Felix's chest like a punch. For a moment, he forgot how to breathe. Her lower lip quivered. Her shoes were wet. Her fingers shivered as though they didn't know where to rest. She looked up at him with a courage she didn't know she had, and a fear no child should ever carry. Felix felt something stir inside him, something that had been buried beneath years of emotional frost, something dangerously close to empathy. "Where is your mother?" he managed, his voice low, steady. The girl blinked, and 2 tears slipped down her cheeks. I waited." She swallowed hard. "She always comes home. She always." Her sentence splintered, drowned by a small, broken sob. Felix knelt, instinctively, unexpectedly. The Iron CEO kneeling before a trembling child. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Amelia." "And where is home, Amelia?" She pointed weakly toward the elevator. Felix hesitated, not out of reluctance, but disbelief at what he was about to do. He was not the kind of man who followed strangers. He was not the kind who let others inside his tightly controlled world. He was certainly not the kind who knelt in hallways during snowstorms. But her fear cracked something in him he had long believed unbreakable. Felix inhaled, stood, and extended a hand. Not touching, simply offering. "Show me." The elevator doors opened, and cold air slapped them as they descended. Amelia shook violently. Felix removed his scarf and wrapped it around her neck. She didn't thank him. She simply pressed her cheek into the softness like someone starved of warmth. When the ground floor doors parted, the storm outside roared in, sharp, merciless, unwelcoming. Felix hesitated. Amelia didn't. She stepped out into the snow with small, determined steps. Felix followed. His expensive shoes sank into the icy slush, his breath steaming the air. The cold bit through his coat, but he barely noticed. All he saw was the tiny figure walking ahead of him, swallowed by snowfall. "Amelia," he called gently, "slow down." "I know the way," she said, without turning. "I have to find her." Her voice shook, but her will did not. Felix swallowed against the knot in his throat. Something about this girl, her resolve, her innocence, her fear, pulled at a part of him he had locked away long ago. As they crossed the street, passing dim streetlights and snow-buried benches, a realization settled into him. He was responsible for her now, whether he wanted to be or not. Before the story dives even deeper, I'd love to know. Backhand index pointing right. If a child came to your door on a freezing night asking for help, what would you do? Share in the comments. Your answers might help someone else find courage. The snowstorm roared around them like an invisible beast, wind whipping Felix's coat, biting at every exposed inch of skin. Amelia's small hands trembled inside his scarf, fingers gripping it as though it could shield her from more than the cold. Felix followed her silently, heart hammering with a strange, unaccustomed urgency. Every instinct screamed caution. He had never dealt with situations like this, never been called to protect anyone beyond his boardroom or his own carefully compartmentalized life. Yet he couldn't leave her. "Amelia," he called softly, careful not to startle her. "Where exactly is your mom?" She shook her head. Her lips quivered. The snowflakes clung to her lashes and melted, leaving little wet trails on her pale cheeks. "I don't know," she whispered, barely audible. She didn't come home last night. She always comes home. But she didn't." The word struck Felix like a hammer. Every muscle in his body tensed. He had seen children scared, lonely, neglected. But hearing the fear in her voice, feeling her small body shivering in the biting snow, sent a jolt straight to his chest. Something inside him, a cold, long-frozen part, began to melt. His mind raced. The city streets stretched before them, empty and muffled by the snow, and yet it felt as though the entire world had stopped. This was no longer about protocol or logic. This was about a little girl who had no one to protect her. And suddenly, that girl was his responsibility. He slowed, crouching to her level, feeling the snow crunch beneath his polished shoes. "Listen, Amelia. I'm going to help you. We'll find her. You're safe with me, I promise." Her wide eyes blinked up at him, glimmering with fear, hope, and something fragile, trust. She nodded once, small and hesitant, before clutching his hand tightly. Felix's throat tightened. The simple, innocent act of holding her hand, the way she needed him, depended on him, was foreign and terrifying, and yet, it anchored him. They moved through the streets in silence. Only the sound of boots against packed snow and the occasional gust of icy wind. Felix's mind raced through possibilities. Where could Colette be? Had something happened to her? Could he even handle this? And yet, with every step, his fear of failure grew, not for himself, but for the girl he had just met. He remembered the boardrooms, the deals, the endless negotiations, the titles, the power, but none of that mattered now. Not when a tiny human being's heart was in his hands. And for the first time in years, Felix felt the raw, unfiltered pulse of responsibility and care. Emotions he had spent a lifetime suppressing. They reached a dimly lit alley, partially blocked by snowdrifts. Amelia froze. She looked down the narrow passage and whispered, "I think she came this way. I think she might be there." Felix glanced around. The streets were silent, almost eerie. Every shadow seemed to stretch. Every gust of wind sounded like a warning. He crouched down to her eye level again. "Stay close to me," he instructed firmly but gently. "No matter what, I won't let anything happen to you." The little girl nodded, her small hand gripping his coat sleeve. Her trust a fragile thread binding them together. Felix felt a strange heat in his chest. A mix of fear and something else. Something he couldn't name but recognized as the first stirrings of empathy and connection in a long, lonely life. Then the alley opened into a small courtyard. A faint light glowed from a half-closed door at the far end. Amelia gasped. That's my home," she whispered. Felix's heart clenched. He saw the front door ajar, snow drifting inside, footprints scattered across the steps. Panic rose within him, and he moved faster, crouching slightly as if preparing for the worst. He realized that this was the pivotal moment. He had crossed the threshold of his controlled life into something unpredictable, chaotic, and profoundly human. Amelia's small voice called out, trembling, "Mom!" No response. Only silence, heavy and thick, like the storm pressing down on them. Felix knelt again, this time beside her, and whispered, "It's okay. We'll find her. Whatever happens, I promise you, you're not alone." Amelia clutched him tightly, burying her face in his coat. Felix felt her fear and desperation as if it were his own. And in that moment he understood. The child had not only reached for her mother, she had reached for him. And he had no choice but to follow her into the unknown. The snow fell heavier. The wind cut sharper. Every step they took together carried the weight of uncertainty, but also the spark of connection. Felix's heart, long encased in ice, began to thaw. And though he did not yet know it, this was the beginning. The spark that would ignite a storm of emotion, truth, and ultimately, unexpected love. Backhand index pointing down. If you saw a child alone and scared in the snow, would you follow them into the storm? Comment your answer below. Let's share courage. The city streets were nearly invisible under the thick, falling snow, turning familiar streets into a white labyrinth. Felix's shoes sank with every step, each crunching footfall echoing in the silence of the night. Amelia walked ahead, small and determined, but occasionally stumbling over icy patches. He caught her arm lightly, steadying her, though she didn't protest. He wanted to ask again about her mother, about Colette, but he didn't. Not yet. The words felt heavy, like an accusation he wasn't ready to voice. Felix had always been a man of control. Plans, schedules, predictable outcomes, that was his world. He thrived on certainty. He thrived on detachment. But now, with Amelia's fear clinging to him like a second skin, that world was cracking. Why did he care so much? He chastised himself silently. This wasn't his problem. He had no obligation to this little girl, or the woman she called mother. And yet, the thought of leaving her alone, shivering in the storm, made him feel hollow in a way he hadn't felt in years. Amelia turned suddenly, snow clinging to her damp hair. "Sir, I think she's in trouble." Felix stiffened. He wanted to reassure her, to promise safety, to tell her everything would be okay, but part of him resisted. What if this was beyond him? What if he failed? What if, in trying to help, he made things worse? He stopped, letting her walk a few steps ahead. Eyes scanning the dim alleyways, heart thumping in his chest. She turned back to look at him, trusting him blindly, and it cut deeper than any winter wind could. She deserved better than a hesitant adult. Felix forced himself to breathe. He couldn't let fear paralyze him. But the tension between instinct and caution warred inside him. Part of him wanted to retreat, to call authorities, to hand her over to someone trained, someone responsible. The other part, his gut, his heart, something raw and new, refused. They reached a street corner shrouded in shadows. Felix felt the weight of silence pressing down. He glanced at Amelia. She looked up at him, her eyes pleading. Her tiny hands were icy, and her teeth chattered. Her trust was absolute. He shook his head. Not yet. He needed more information. He needed to be certain. But every second of hesitation added to the stakes. Amelia's voice broke the tension. Sir, I don't want anyone else. I just want my mom. Her simplicity, her desperation, struck a nerve. Felix looked away, grappling with the emotions he hadn't allowed himself in years. Fear, empathy, guilt, longing. He hated feeling exposed. He hated the vulnerability in admitting he cared. They moved forward cautiously. Every alley, every shadow, felt like a test. Felix's mind raced. What if Colette was hurt? What if she didn't want to be found? What if this whole night spiraled out of control? The storm grew heavier, snow swirling around them, obscuring their path. Felix's breath came in shallow bursts, not from cold, but from the tension in his chest. He realized that protecting Amelia was no longer just about finding her mother. It was about confronting his own walls, the barriers he had built around his heart for decades. He stopped again, finally, and knelt beside her, his voice low and calm. Amelia, I need you to trust me, okay? We will find her. No matter what, I won't let anything happen to you. She nodded, squeezing his hand. But the hesitation lingered, his hesitation, not hers. The child's trust pressed upon him, demanding action. Yet he resisted, afraid of the responsibility, afraid of failure, afraid of feeling too much. The streets narrowed, snow piling up against walls and door frames. Felix could see the faint outline of a door ahead. The entrance to a small apartment complex. His pulse quickened. Amelia pointed toward it. There. I think she's there. Felix's gut clenched. Every instinct screamed. Step forward, find her, do not fail. But the other voice inside him hesitated, whispering about boundaries, the unknown, and the chaos he was stepping into. He took a slow breath, shaking off the resistance. He would not turn back, not yet. Not while Amelia's eyes held the fragile trust of someone whose world was crumbling. But inside he knew. This night would force him to face truths he had avoided for far too long. About himself, about love, and about vulnerability. He rose, brushing snow off his coat, extending his hand to Amelia once more. Together, they would cross the threshold into uncertainty. Hesitant, afraid, and profoundly human. And though he didn't realize it yet, resisting would only make the eventual connection stronger. The struggle between fear and responsibility, hesitation and action, would define the next chapters of their intertwined lives. Would you follow a child into a storm if you weren't sure it was safe? Share your thoughts below. Your story might inspire someone else. The storm had intensified, turning streets into rivers of white, the wind gnawing at any exposed skin. Felix and Amelia finally reached the small apartment complex. The door was ajar, snow drifting inside, carrying the chill of the night with it. Felix glanced down at Amelia, whose small hand still clung tightly to his. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with trust and fear combined. He pushed the door open fully, stepping inside first to block the cold draft. The entryway was small, cluttered, and dimly lit, with coats and shoes scattered. Felix's breath fogged in the air, and he felt the weight of the storm pressing down on them both. Amelia hesitated at the threshold, and he bent down to meet her gaze. "It's okay," he murmured. "We're here together. No one can hurt you now." She nodded, stepping inside, shivering. Felix led her to a corner, pulling a small blanket from his coat and wrapping it around her. Her tiny fingers clutched the fabric, and for a brief moment, Felix felt the world narrow down to just the two of them, suspended in a fragile bubble of safety amidst chaos. The apartment felt empty, yet it hummed with the memory of life that had been disrupted. Amelia's eyes scanned the room, lingering on a small table with scattered papers and a half-empty cup. She took a hesitant step forward. "I thought she would be here," Amelia whispered. Felix crouched beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. We'll find her. But for now you're safe here. We can wait together. She nodded, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her fear. Felix realized that the storm outside mirrored the storm inside both of them. The uncertainty, the fear, the helplessness. But within this shared space, a fragile connection was forming. He could feel it in the way Amelia clung to him, in the way he instinctively protected her. Hours seemed to pass with the storm howling outside. Felix checked the time and realized how late it had become. Yet neither moved to leave. The walls around them, the physical walls of the apartment and the emotional walls Felix had built over decades, forced them into close proximity. They couldn't escape, couldn't avoid each other, and the tension began to shift. Felix's mind wandered to the woman he was searching for, the mother of this little girl, and the realization hit him. He had entered a world he had never experienced before. One that demanded emotional presence, vulnerability, and courage. The storm outside was harsh, but the storm inside him, the awakening of care, responsibility, and something dangerously close to love, was even fiercer. Amelia finally curled up on the small sofa, her tiny frame shivering under the blanket. Felix sat beside her, careful to give her space but close enough that she could feel his presence. She whispered a small thank you, her voice barely audible over the roar of the wind. For the first time, Felix let himself breathe. The fear that had restrained him, the fear of attachment, of failure, of responsibility, was still there, but muted by the act of simply being present for someone else. He realized that forcing proximity, being unable to retreat, was beginning to change him. The storm outside was relentless, but inside the tiny apartment, an unexpected warmth began to take hold. Felix and Amelia were bound together. Not by choice, but by circumstance, by necessity, by the snowstorm that refused to let them go. And in that bond, fragile yet undeniable, the first seeds of trust and connection began to sprout. Felix looked down at Amelia, noticing the way she had nestled into the blanket, her small hand occasionally brushing against his arm. He knew the night was far from over, but this forced proximity, this shared moment of vulnerability, was already shifting the dynamics between them. He was no longer just a CEO observing life from a distance. He was a protector, a guardian, and perhaps something more than he had ever allowed himself to be. The night stretched on. Outside, the snow continued to fall, relentless and thick. Inside, silence and subtle communication filled the space. A glance, a small gesture, a quiet breath shared in tandem. These became the language between them. Felix could feel the weight of Amelia's trust pressing gently on his conscience, shaping his choices, guiding his actions. And though the storm was far from over, both outside and within, Felix understood one undeniable truth. Proximity had a power all its own. It forced acknowledgement, connection, and confrontation with the emotions they had both been running from. And in that small apartment, surrounded by the relentless blizzard, something irreversible had begun to form. They were no longer just a CEO and a lost child. They were two souls bound by circumstance, forced into shared existence, and inching toward a fragile but growing bond that would change the course of both their lives. Backhand index pointing down. Have you ever been forced into a situation with someone and discovered an unexpected connection? Share your story in the comments. The apartment was quiet now, save for the occasional gust of wind rattling the window panes and the soft creaking of the building settling under the weight of the storm. Felix watched Amelia as she sat curled up on the sofa, the small blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her eyes, wide and wary, were fixed on the floor, lost in thought. Something about the way she trembled, not from the cold alone, but from a deeper, invisible pain, made Felix's chest tighten. He had been through crises before, of course. Boardroom disasters, business betrayals, endless negotiations. But none of those moments had ever touched him like this. Not because they were less important, but because they never demanded his heart in the same way. And here it was, laid bare, wrapped in the form of a tiny, shivering child. "Amelia," he said softly, kneeling in front of her. "Do you want to tell me what happened with your mom?" She flinched slightly at the question, then hesitated, her small hands clutching the edge of the blanket as if it were a lifeline. "I don't know where she went. she whispered, voice trembling. She fights with people sometimes. And then she goes out. And I'm scared she won't come back. Felix's heart sank. The weight of those words hit him harder than any boardroom loss or personal failure. He recognized fear, helplessness, and abandonment. The same emotions he had kept buried in himself for decades. And yet, in this child's confession, he also saw the echo of a life that mirrored his own in ways he hadn't expected. I understand, he said slowly, his voice soft but steady. Sometimes people we love make mistakes. Sometimes they leave when we need them the most. But that doesn't mean they don't care. And it certainly doesn't mean you're alone. Amelia looked at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. But what if she never comes back? What if it's my fault? Felix's chest tightened. He wanted to sweep away her fear, to tell her that she was blameless, that none of this was her responsibility. But he also knew that mere words were not enough. She needed understanding, patience, and someone willing to bear witness to her pain without judgment. He reached out, gently lifting her chin so she could meet his eyes. Amelia, it's not your fault. None of it. You are brave and your mom, no matter what, loves you. But right now she's lost or scared or struggling. We'll find her. And until then, you don't have to face this alone. Her small fingers twined into his, a silent acknowledgement that she was trusting him. More than she had trusted anyone in a long time. Felix felt a strange warmth, a protective instinct that he had long buried under his ambition and detachment. Then Amelia hesitated again, glancing at a small, tattered notebook on the table. She picked it up, flipping through pages filled with messy handwriting and small sketches. This is mine, she said softly. I write here when I'm scared, or when I don't know how to say things. My mom, she used to read it, sometimes. But now she doesn't. Felix studied the pages with her, noticing the combination of fear, hope, and longing in her words. Every scribbled line was a plea for connection, for safety, for love, a mirror of her fragile, aching heart. He realized that these pages weren't just a diary. They were a window into her soul, a testimony of survival and resilience. These are beautiful, Felix said, his voice barely above a whisper. You have a courage most people your age don't. And a heart that's already stronger than mine. Amelia's lips quivered, and for the first time, Felix saw her begin to release a fraction of the weight she had been carrying alone. She leaned against him slightly, a gesture of trust, of acknowledgement, of fragile hope. Then, as if pushed by some unspoken need, Felix began to share his own story, carefully at first, then more openly. He spoke of the childhood he had spent in empty mansions, where wealth had been abundant but affection scarce. Of lessons learned in solitude. Of mistakes and lost connections. Of a life built on control to avoid pain. He spoke in fragments, letting the words fall gently, cautiously, like seeds in the snow. Amelia listened in silence, her small hand occasionally brushing his arm. And Felix realized something profound. Sharing his pain didn't make him weak. It made him human. Vulnerable, yes, but human and capable of connection. I didn't know people could care about someone like me, Amelia whispered. I thought I'd always be alone. Felix's throat tightened. He shook his head slowly, his eyes misting. You're not alone anymore. Not now. Not ever again if I can help it. The hours passed, marked only by the storm outside and the quiet sharing inside. Felix and Amelia began to peel away the layers of fear, misunderstanding, and hidden pain that had kept them isolated. Each revelation, Amelia's worries about her mother, Felix's long-hidden loneliness, built a bridge between them, fragile but unbreakable. By the time the storm outside began to wane, the bond had deepened. Amelia leaned against Felix's chest, exhausted but comforted, her trust fully placed in the man who had once been a stranger. And Felix, for the first time in years, felt the pulse of true connection. The warmth of caring for someone, of being needed, of being allowed to love without restriction. In that small, dimly lit apartment, amidst the echoes of confessions and unspoken fears, Felix understood a crucial truth. Love, unexpected, fragile, and brave, was already beginning to grow. And sometimes, it began in the most unlikely of places, under the harshest of storms, and with the simplest of acts. listening, trusting, and holding a frightened hand. Backhand index pointing down. Have you ever shared a secret that changed your connection with someone? Comment below and share your story. The storm had finally eased outside, leaving the city streets glittering under a fresh layer of snow, the world hushed and pristine. Inside the small apartment, Felix and Amelia sat in quiet companionship. The shared confessions from the previous night had left them both exhausted, yet lighter somehow, as if the act of telling and listening had peeled away a layer of fear that neither had known how to carry alone. Felix watched Amelia, her small frame curled up under the blanket, eyes heavy with sleep but still glimmering with cautious curiosity. He marveled at her resilience, how a child so small could carry such a weight of worry and uncertainty. It stirred something deep within him, a protective instinct that was new, yet instinctive. "You know," he said softly, trying to make his voice casual, "you're braver than most adults I know." Amelia tilted her head slightly, the corners of her mouth twitching as if attempting a smile. "I don't feel brave," she whispered. "I just don't want to be scared anymore." Felix leaned closer, gently brushing a strand of damp hair from her forehead. "Bravery isn't about never being scared," he said. "It's about what you do even when you are. And you've done that already tonight." A small laugh escaped her, a soft, almost musical sound that made Felix's chest ache with a strange, unnameable warmth. It was a laugh that carried trust, a release of tension, and a hint of hope. For the first time since meeting her, he felt a genuine connection that wasn't filtered by obligation, fear, or societal expectation. They shared a simple meal together. Instant soup from a small kettle, bread Felix had grabbed from his car before the storm, but the act of eating side by side felt profoundly intimate. Amelia's cautious conversation revealed her sharp wit and keen observation of the world, which contrasted with her childlike vulnerability. She asked questions about Felix's life, his travels, and hesitantly, about why he lived alone. Felix answered honestly, choosing moments of openness that felt risky yet necessary. He spoke about the sacrifices he had made for success, the loneliness it had brought, and the walls he had built to protect himself from pain. Amelia listened intently, occasionally tilting her head, her eyes wide with wonder and empathy. "You're kind of like a hero," she said, her voice soft. "Not the kind in stories, but someone who helps even when it's scary." Felix felt a lump in his throat. Her words were simple, yet they carried a gravity that pierced the barriers he had carefully constructed around his heart. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to hope, not just for Amelia, but for something he hadn't dared to imagine for himself. Genuine connection, emotional intimacy, perhaps even love. As the day wore on, they shared small moments of laughter, fleeting games, and gentle teasing. Amelia recounted a story about her favorite stuffed animal. Felix exaggerated a tale of his first disastrous attempt at cooking, and for a while, the apartment was filled with warmth that had nothing to do with the heating system. It was the warmth of shared human presence, fragile yet undeniably real. At one point, Amelia paused, her expression thoughtful. "Do you think maybe people can change?" she asked quietly. "Like really change?" Felix considered the question carefully, his eyes meeting hers. "I think people can," he said. "It takes courage, honesty, and sometimes someone to remind them why it's worth trying. And I think you already believe in that." Her small hand found his again, squeezing gently. Felix's chest swelled with a protective, almost paternal emotion, yet mingled with something more. Something that hinted at love, trust, and the beginning of something neither of them could have predicted. The snow outside had begun to melt in the morning sun, casting a pale glow into the apartment. Felix and Amelia, once strangers bound by circumstance, were now companions bound by trust and fragile hope. Every shared glance, every quiet gesture, every moment of vulnerability had deepened their bond. They had begun to create a new narrative together. One where fear no longer dictated the rules, where past pains could be acknowledged without consuming them, and where connection, however delicate, could blossom even amidst uncertainty. Felix realized that for the first time, he was not just protecting a child, he was nurturing a bond that had the power to heal both of them. And Amelia, with her small hand in his, was teaching him that vulnerability was not weakness. It was the foundation of true strength and love. By the afternoon, the apartment had become a sanctuary, a space of fragile security where both could exhale and allow themselves to feel. Felix knew that the journey ahead would not be easy. The missing mother, the uncertainties, the external challenges. But for the first time, he also knew they wouldn't face it alone. They had discovered something invaluable: trust, compassion, and the fragile beginnings of love. In that moment, Felix made an unspoken vow: to protect Amelia, to help find her mother, and to allow himself to experience the connection he had long denied himself. And as Amelia rested her head against his shoulder, sleepy but peaceful, he realized that this bond, unexpected, tender, and fragile, was already changing the course of both their lives. Backhand index pointing down. Have you ever formed an unexpected bond with someone during a challenging time? Share your story in the comments below. The morning sun had begun to pierce through the remnants of the storm, but inside the small apartment, a different storm was brewing. A storm of confusion, fear, and miscommunication. Felix had just returned from speaking with a local neighbor, who claimed to have seen Amelia's mother leave abruptly, but the details were conflicting and troubling. He entered the apartment to find Amelia sitting on the sofa, hugging her knees tightly, eyes red from crying. "Amelia, what's wrong?" Felix asked, concern tightening his voice. She looked at him, her small face contorted with hurt and fear. "It's all my fault. Mom's gone forever because of me," she cried. "You just don't understand." Felix's heart clenched. He kneeled beside her, trying to reach her, but she pulled away. The walls she had built around herself, walls he had thought were fragile, now felt impenetrable. "Amelia, listen to me," he said gently. "You are not to blame. None of this is your fault." No, you don't get it," she shouted, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You're just like everyone else, leaving me." The words hit Felix like a physical blow. In that instant, he felt years of his own fear of attachment and failure crashing into him. The connection they had painstakingly built over days felt like it was shattering into irreparable pieces. He had risked opening his heart, only to have it recoiled with her pain and anger. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself, but his mind raced with frustration and helplessness. He wanted to make her understand, to repair the bond, but every attempt only seemed to push her further away. Amelia, overwhelmed by fear and a sense of betrayal, buried herself in her blanket, sobbing quietly now, her trust fractured. Felix realized that words alone could not fix this. He needed to show her, through action and presence, that he was not going anywhere. He moved slowly, maintaining a respectful distance, and pulled a small stack of Amelia's drawings and her diary from the table. "I've read these," he said softly, placing them carefully in front of her. "I know what you've been feeling. I know your fears, your loneliness, and I understand, more than you realize. But running from connection won't make it better. You don't have to face this alone." Amelia glanced at the papers, then at him. Her tears were still fresh, but her breathing began to steady slightly. Felix could feel the tension between them, the fragile line of trust that had been strained to its breaking point. Then, the sound of a phone ringing shattered the silence. Felix grabbed it, and a neighbor's voice confirmed they had seen Amelia's mother leave in the night with another man, seemingly distracted and unaware of her daughter. The revelation was both a relief and a complication. Relief because it confirmed Amelia's story wasn't imagined. Complication because it deepened the sense of abandonment she felt. Amelia flinched at Felix's explanation. "See? It's true. She doesn't care about me." Felix's chest tightened. He understood her pain but knew this moment could define whether their fragile bond survived or collapsed completely. He sat silently for a moment, letting her anger and sorrow flow without interruption. He didn't try to fix it instantly. He just held space for her grief. Hours passed, and the apartment became suffused with the quiet tension of unspoken emotions. Felix's patience was tested, as was Amelia's resilience. Finally he reached out, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Amelia, I can't make her come back right now, but I can be here. I won't leave. Not like she did. Not like you fear everyone will." She looked up at him, eyes glistening with vulnerability, and for the first time since the argument began, allowed herself to absorb his words. The shattering moment had forced them both to confront their deepest fears. Hers of abandonment, his of attachment. They didn't speak again that evening. Instead, Felix sat nearby, giving her space but never leaving her side. Amelia slowly began to relax against him, small shivers of trust creeping back as the night stretched on. The crisis had broken them, yes, but it had also tested the foundations of their bond in a way that words alone never could. By midnight, they were both exhausted, their hearts heavy yet strangely aligned. The shatter point had been reached. The moment when trust and connection were almost lost, but it had also revealed the depth of their attachment. Both knew that recovery would be difficult, that wounds needed time to heal, but the possibility of reconciliation, and even deeper connection, remained. Felix understood that the path forward required patience, empathy, and courage. Amelia understood that there was someone she could rely on, even when the world felt cruel. And though their bond was bruised and fragile, it had survived the storm, both literal and emotional, that had threatened to tear it apart. In the quiet aftermath, Felix whispered softly, "Tomorrow we'll find her. And until then, I'm not going anywhere." Amelia, exhausted and teary-eyed, leaned into him, a small gesture of trust returning. The shatter point had tested them, but it had also shown them the strength of their growing connection. Fragile, yes, but unbroken. Backhand index pointing down. Have you ever experienced a moment where trust was broken but the bond survived? Share how you healed in the comments below. The night had settled into a quiet stillness outside, the city streets glimmering under the soft reflection of streetlights on melting snow. Inside the apartment, a different kind of tension filled the air, one born not of storms or missing mothers, but of choices that demanded courage, honesty, and the willingness to embrace vulnerability. Felix sat in the armchair, his elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped tightly together. Across from him, Amelia sat curled on the sofa, her blanket wrapped snugly around her shoulders, eyes fixed on the floor as she worked to steady her breathing after the emotional turmoil of the day. The events of the past hours had left both of them raw. The argument, the tears, and the revelations about Amelia's mother's sudden disappearance had fractured their fragile trust. Yet beneath the tension, a quiet understanding simmered, one that both had to confront. Felix knew that rebuilding their bond required more than words. It required a choice, a conscious act of vulnerability and courage. Amelia, for her part, had begun to understand that her fear of abandonment could no longer dictate her actions. "Amelia," Felix began softly, his voice low but steady, "I know today was hard, harder than either of us imagined. But I need you to hear me." She lifted her eyes briefly, hesitating, then nodded slightly, though the wall of caution was still present. "You don't have to trust me completely right now," he continued. "I don't expect it. But I am asking, are you willing to let me stay? Not just tonight, but until we find your mom? And to trust me enough to lean on me." Amelia's hands tightened around the blanket, her small frame trembling slightly. Her mind raced with fear. Fear of losing someone again, fear of being hurt, fear that trusting him might bring even more pain. Yet deep inside, she recognized something she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. Hope. I don't know," she whispered. "I'm scared that if I let you in, you'll leave too." Felix's chest tightened at her words. He understood that fear intimately, because he had spent most of his life erecting walls to prevent the exact same pain. Yet he also recognized the importance of choice, the conscious decision to remain vulnerable despite risk. "I won't leave," he said firmly, kneeling beside her this time. "Not like others have. I'm here, Amelia, and I'm not going anywhere. But you have to choose. You can stay closed off, or you can take this step with me. I can't force you, but I can promise to walk beside you if you let me." Amelia's eyes glistened with tears as she considered the gravity of his words. Her small body quivered as she weighed her fear against the growing trust she felt toward him. The apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the radiator and the occasional sound of the city beyond the windows. In that silence, the weight of choice pressed on her more powerfully than any argument or storm ever could. Finally, with a trembling breath, she extended her hand toward Felix. "Okay," she said softly. "I want to try." The moment was quiet but monumental. Felix reached for her hand, holding it firmly yet gently. He felt a rush of emotion, relief, hope, and a newfound determination to honor her trust. They sat together in silence, letting the fragile connection deepen. The choice had been made, not just to trust, but to allow themselves to move forward despite fear and uncertainty. Felix then suggested they make a plan to locate her mother, taking practical steps together. They began to brainstorm possibilities, checking local shelters, asking neighbors, and retracing the route her mother might have taken. Amelia contributed cautiously, her confidence growing as Felix encouraged her input. Every suggestion she offered, every detail she remembered, became a thread in the bond they were weaving together. As the night progressed, Felix shared more about his own past, about moments when he had felt abandoned, lost, or unsure of whom to trust. Amelia listened intently, occasionally asking questions, occasionally just observing in quiet empathy. The act of mutual sharing deepened their connection. The walls of isolation they had built around their hearts were slowly crumbling. There were moments of laughter too, brief but genuine. Felix made exaggerated stories of his childhood mishaps, and Amelia offered corrections and giggles. These light-hearted moments were crucial. They reminded both of them that vulnerability didn't have to be painful, and that joy could exist alongside fear. The night wore on, and eventually, exhaustion took over. Amelia rested her head against Felix's shoulder, feeling a sense of safety she had never known. Felix, holding her gently, realized that the choice she had made, to trust, to stay, to open her heart, was more powerful than any single gesture he could offer. It was a declaration of faith, courage, and hope. In that moment, Felix understood the depth of his own emotions. What he felt for Amelia went beyond mere responsibility or protection. It was a budding, unexpected love that demanded patience, care, and unwavering commitment. Amelia, in turn, began to recognize that love and trust could coexist with fear. That letting someone in didn't have to mean losing oneself, but rather discovering the strength to face the world together. By the time the first light of dawn crept through the windows, both were transformed. The choice had been made, and with it came a fragile but profound hope. They would face the uncertainties of the coming days together, prepared to navigate fear, hope, and love as partners. Felix's heart, long guarded, had begun to open fully. Amelia's heart, once overshadowed by abandonment and mistrust, had embraced the possibility of connection. As the sun rose, Felix whispered softly, "No matter what happens, we face it together. I promise." Amelia, still half asleep but secure, nodded. Her small hand found his again, squeezing it gently. The night's choice had forged a bond stronger than fear, fragile yet resilient, one that would guide them through the challenges ahead. Backhand index pointing down. Have you ever had to make a choice to trust someone fully, despite fear? Share your experience in the comments below. The first light of morning spilled through the curtains, soft and golden, painting the apartment in a warm glow. Felix stirred from his restless sleep, and found Amelia still curled up beside him, eyes half open and a fragile smile tugging at her lips. The night had been long, filled with tension, fear, and difficult choices, but now, a sense of calm pervaded the room. They had made it through the storm of emotion, and the fragile bond that had been tested so severely was now stronger, resilient, and filled with possibility. Felix stretched and rose quietly, not wanting to disturb her further. He pulled on his coat and stepped outside into the crisp morning air, determined to continue their search for Amelia's mother. The city was slowly waking, and the streets, still streaked with snow, glistened under the rising sun. Every step he took was measured, intentional, a reflection of the promise he had made to Amelia the night before, that he would not leave, no matter the obstacles. Meanwhile, Amelia stirred more fully, rubbing her eyes and taking a deep breath. She felt something new: courage. The night's decision to trust Felix had shifted something inside her, allowing hope to replace fear. She dressed quickly, eager to help in the search, and brought a small backpack with her belongings, including her diary and drawings, as a reminder of the journey that had brought her and Felix together. Felix returned to find her waiting, her small hand slipping into his. He smiled, a mix of pride and tenderness washing over him. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," she replied, her voice steady. Together they navigated the city streets, asking neighbors, checking small shops, and visiting local shelters. Each step was a small victory, each lead a fragile thread of hope. Felix noticed how Amelia's demeanor had changed. She was cautious, yes, but confident. She asked questions, suggested possible places her mother might have gone, and even comforted Felix when his frustration threatened to surface. It was a reversal of roles in some ways, and yet it symbolized the partnership they had begun to build. Hours passed, and just when hope began to waver, they found a clue. A shopkeeper remembered seeing a woman fitting her mother's description enter a nearby cafe the previous evening, looking worried and distracted. Felix and Amelia hurried there, hearts pounding. And then, as they entered the small cafe, there she was, Amelia's mother, frazzled, guilty, and unaware of the depth of worry she had caused. "Mom!" Amelia exclaimed, running forward. Her mother froze, eyes widening with recognition and shock. Felix followed closely, staying back slightly to give them space, but ready to step in if needed. "Amelia, I'm so sorry," her mother stammered, tears welling up. "I didn't mean to worry you. I got caught up. I lost track of time." Amelia's voice wavered, but she held her ground. "I was scared, Mom. I needed you." Felix watched, his heart swelling at the raw honesty and courage Amelia displayed. Her mother knelt down, embracing her tightly, and Amelia, after a moment of hesitation, returned the hug. Felix allowed himself a small, relieved smile. The crisis had been resolved, but the emotional journey was far from over. It had merely reached a new chapter. As they walked out of the cafe together, Felix stayed close to Amelia, his hand firmly holding hers. She glanced up at him, eyes bright with gratitude and trust. He smiled back, silently acknowledging that their bond had transformed both of their lives. The storm that had brought them together, the fear and tears, the choices and reconciliations, they had all led to this moment of shared strength and connection. That evening, back at the apartment, Felix and Amelia sat together by the window, watching the sunset. Amelia's mother had apologized again, promising to be more present, and Felix had offered gentle guidance on boundaries, trust, and healing. The tension had softened into warmth, the fear into cautious optimism. "You know," Amelia said softly, leaning her head against Felix's shoulder, "I never thought I could feel safe and happy all at once." Felix tightened his arm around her, a smile tugging at his lips. "That's because you allowed yourself to trust. You chose hope over fear. And I promise, I'll always be here to help you feel that way." Amelia smiled fully now, the glow of genuine trust and connection shining in her eyes. Felix, too, felt the weight lift from his chest. The walls he had built around his heart finally softened by the unexpected, transformative power of love. Not the love he had expected, but one more profound, rooted in protection, understanding, and mutual respect. As night fell, they all sat together, a small family reunited in the aftermath of fear and uncertainty. Felix knew challenges would come. They always did. But the emotional foundations laid over these past days were strong. Amelia's laughter filled the apartment again, tentative at first, then fully free. Felix realized that the little girl who had hesitated to trust, and the woman who had faltered in her responsibilities, had both been given a second chance, guided by his steadfast presence and care. In the quiet moments, Felix whispered to Amelia, "No matter what happens tomorrow, or the day after, we face it together." She squeezed his hand in response, a small but profound confirmation of their bond. Outside, the city lights flickered, the snow melting into water and warmth, a symbolic reflection of their journey, cold, uncertain, yet ultimately full of light, hope, and love. Felix and Amelia's story had begun with fear and separation, but it ended with trust, connection, and a love that neither expected but both desperately needed. The journey had transformed them, healed wounds, and built a foundation for a future where they could face anything, together. The snow outside glistened in the moonlight as Felix glanced at Amelia, her small hand in his, and whispered softly, almost to himself, "This is just the beginning." And for the first time in a long while he believed it. Backhand index pointing down. Have you ever experienced a moment where love and trust healed a fear or loss? Share your story in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way to the end. Your time, your support, and your presence here mean more than words can say. If this story touched your heart, inspired you, or kept you watching, Please make sure to subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this one. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss a new upload. Until next time, stay blessed, stay strong, and keep believing in love. See you in the next story.